Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. I'm Annette Richmond. This is a Smarter Career Moves LinkedIn live show. And I'm so excited to have Marc with me today. I guess it was the strength of Hannah's recommendation that made you come here and join me today. I've been following you, following your work for quite some time. Over a decade.
Wait a minute, I'm not that old.
Well, you were very young. You were a teenager at the time when I started following you. I was as well. So for anyone who doesn't know you or about you and what you do, can you just share with us?
Sure. Just so everyone knows, I'm a recovering engineer. Yes, there's a 12-step program for that. I spent most of my career in high tech, except when I finally had a near fatal bicycle accident back in 2002. I hit a car head on at 50 miles an hour. At that point, I started realizing that I knew how to pivot and pivot and pivot. I've made 7 career changes in my lifetime. And so I started Career Pivot back in 2012. I launched the brand. I guess I left my last corporate gig, a startup, in 2011. And so I've been helping those of us who I like to now say who are in the second half of life to essentially plot out your career, because many people need to keep on working. There are those of us who have no intention of ever retiring, but I want to work on my terms. And that means I'm not going to work for the man anymore. So I started Career Pivot. I wrote my first book, Repurpose Your Career, back in 2013. I've now gone through 3 editions. I started the Repurpose Your Career podcast back in 2016. And I'm publishing episode 277. So that's me in a nutshell. And by the way, I live in Mexico. I'm an expat.
Well, thank you so much. And hello to Kenneth Turner, who is joining us, and Grant. Sorry, I don't want to mispronounce your last name, who is joining us from Zambia. So thanks so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it. So, one of the things that I find really interesting is the idea of the making career pivots. I have done that several times in my life. I'm in that second half career as well. And, but it sounds like it's about making incremental changes. And as you say, kind of having a plan, rather than sort of sweeping changes. So am I correct in that assumption that that's like a step-by-step thing?
Yeah. I mean, the reality is most of us, when we reach our 40s and 50s, we have obligations, we have mortgages, we have family support. And the reality is, it's kind of like I'm an engineer and I want to go be a pastry chef. Okay, I'm just not going to go be a pastry chef. Right? Now, may I go work as an engineer in a bakery? In a commercial bakery? Yes. And I may take that in incremental steps as I go along. And I had on my podcast last year, Diane Wu David, who wrote the book Future Proof. And one of the things that she talks about in the book is experimenting in your career. And that is, start doing things that you actually might enjoy, you think you're going to enjoy, and do small experiments with it to see whether you really are. Because there are some folks who, well, I'll use an example. After my near fatal bicycle accident, I went off and taught high school math. I taught in an inner city high school. By the way, I was really good at it. By the way, it exhausted me.
Yeah, I bet.
I mean, I was in my late 40s. I had convinced myself I was an extrovert. By the way, I'm a big time introvert.
And me too.
right?
Yep.
I do not get energy from being around people. I love being around people. I'm a phenomenally good public speaker. In fact, that's what I did for a lot of my career. By the way, it exhausts me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I learned I'm a closet introvert. So yes, it's going out and trying stuff and making these incremental steps. I like to say almost all my career changes were a half step career change.
Okay.
Right. I had 1 foot in the old world, 1 foot in the new world. And by the way, there was always a relationship that took me across.
Oh, I'm sure. And, I want to talk more about that. But I hear what you're saying. I went back to school and got a master's in psych, and my intention was to get a PhD and work with clients down the road. That was what I was thinking. And I landed at a career training and placement facility for chronically mentally ill. That was my first job when I got my degree. It was like right before I got my degree. And I found, because we had clients in programs that would run like 12 weeks, and they were with us in the office all day. And I found that was not for me, because I am an introvert as well. And while I love to go to a conference and see my friends and learn and everything, I need to spend at least one night in my room getting room service to have that
Yeah.
downtime. So I hear you, and people think of being introverted as being shy, and it's not that you're shy, it's just that you need to have that alone time, that downtime.
Well, what most people don't understand, introversion and extroversion is not how you behave. It's where you get your energy from.
Yes.
And so, and one of the things I have discovered is like I became a closet introvert. I behave like an extrovert. But what I found is when I hit my 50s, staying out there became exhausting. I like to say when almost all of us start a career, we become actors. We play roles. And by the way, we get paid more to behave extrovertedly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So therefore, and I like to say when I hit my 50s, suddenly staying in character became exhausting. And many of us don't even realize that we are in character, because we may have developed these set of skills and we may actually enjoy using those skills. I was a geek that could speak. Yes, that's an oxymoron. And I was good at it. I got tons of praise. I got paid a lot of money. By the way, it was exhausting.
Yeah. Mm.
And I finally had to realize I can't do this.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And it's I mean, I could talk to you for, the rest of the time about this, but for people that are out there, one of the things that I want to mention, and you and I talked about this briefly, and it's on, with your book and everything, that you specialize in baby boomers, and I would include Generation X, because they are of that age now. So what influenced you to choose that demographic?
I came out of teaching back in 2006, and I found Launchpad Job Club, an organization I was affiliated in Austin for a dozen years, served on the board. And I looked around, and we had these big meetings, and people looked like me. They're all in our 50s. And many of them were deer in the headlights because they had worked for IBM, Freescale, Motorola, Dell. They'd been there a long time, and suddenly they got laid off. And I started looking around, well, who's writing books and who's discussing careers for baby boomers? And the answer was almost nobody. And why? Because we were all going to go retire.
Yeah,
well,
right.
I hired a recent graduate from St. Edward's University who was a history major to do some research for me. And I gave him 10 questions about, finances and other things around our generation. And the numbers he came back with weren't bad. They were god awful. The reality is well over half of our population, it may be up as high as 80%, can't afford to retire.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I said, I live in a retirement mecca here in Mexico, where right now they've turned on the spigot and the people are flowing down here like crazy. I mean, there are 2 million Americans living in Mexico.
Yeah.
Right.
And go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's and by the way, half of them are living here illegally. They're wetbacks. They're here illegally because they can't afford the modest income requirements.
Okay.
So
okay.
so these people need to keep working. So I said, who's helping these folks? Like, nobody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll raise my hand. And that's how I kind of got in. And most of my career changes were all after 40.
Wow. Yeah. I've had several as well. When I got my master's, I was in it. I was in my 40s, and so I've done several things. Taught university, worked as a recruiter, etc. Since then. So I hear you on that. Now, one of the things your book, Career Pivot, is a guide to repurposing one's career in the second half of life. And one of the challenges that I think people in that age group face, yeah, let's see it. Okay, awesome. And it's in the third edition, as you mentioned. So one of the first challenges that I always think of people in that age group is age discrimination. I mean, I have friends, female friends in particular, who tell me they start feeling it at 40. So based on my experience personally and working with clients, the first step to sort of really combat age discrimination is adjusting your own mindset. Because I had a client a candidate that I worked with when I was a recruiter. She was in her mid 60s at the time, and I was recruiting in the digital advertising space, which, it's a pretty young industry. And while she was not hired by our client, she was one of the top 3 candidates in the running for the job, and she got a job shortly after. But it was her attitude. She just was vibrant and energetic. And so I'd like to know your thoughts about that whole mindset thing.
Well, first thing you have to understand is almost all of us are ageist, i.e. we discriminate based on age.
Mm-hmm.
For those of us who are older, it's mostly against younger people.
Yep.
So first thing you do is you look at your own language and look at how you look at getting older. I had Becca Levy, who wrote the recent book. She's a Yale professor, Breaking the Age Code. And one of the things she talked about was our own age beliefs. By the way, how we look at aging actually affects our own health.
Oh, okay.
Right? If we look at getting older as a bad thing, by the way, as we get older, our health will deteriorate. It's also getting rid of the ageist language. Ashton Applewhite, who was on my podcast a couple of years ago, she has in her TED Talk talks about the fact that, don't use the words, "Oh, I had a senior moment." Because the 16-year-old, when she can't find her keys, doesn't say, "Well, I had a junior moment."
Yeah.
And start looking at your own attitudes. Because, by the way, the only thing you have control over is your own behavior.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's all you really have control. You do not control other people.
Yeah.
But if you change your own behavior, and by the way, you stay, and one of the key ones is make sure you stay relevant.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the key pieces here is we reach a point at our age where, I've got 30 plus years experience. No one gives a crap if it's not relevant experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
And we titled this "Dealing with Career and Industry Disruption." We are going through one of the most disruptive periods in my lifetime,
Yeah.
and therefore we can't rest on our laurels. We have to know how to work across generations. We
Mhm.
actually have to know. One of the key pieces I always find is very often when we reach this age, our network ages out,
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
people who pulled us along in our career, particularly after this pandemic, they're retired, they're out of power, or they're dead.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to network down, which
Mhm.
means you have to, you very often, I find it so many of us, as we go through our lifespans, we age segregate. Like when we
Yeah.
went to school, we were
Mhm.
always with people our own age. We tend to, and at some point in time, you need to learn how to network down, because
Yeah.
we have stereotypes around millennials and Gen Z that,
Yeah.
by the way, ain't true. I like to call that, in my book, I call it MSU disorder, make stuff up.
Well,
Uh,
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, of course, that is, but when there's so many isms out there, and people can think you're too old, you're too young, maybe we don't want white men because we're looking for diversity, or there's so many things out there, and I've been guilty of that myself. You go into the Apple store with your phone, and people think, oh, well, the person that young guy with the pink hair, he must know more than the woman with the gray hair, and that's just, as you say, it's just not true. It's just adjusting the attitude, and it's very interesting when you talk about people looking at their own age. It's I think I know that I've been guilty of that at times. I think maybe many people are, but it seems also a lot of it is when you say stay relevant, and not saying, oh, you remind me of my daughter, or you remind me of my mother, or something like that. I've had that happen in a store. They say, oh yeah, my mom likes that too, and I'm like, okay. but what are some of the other challenges that you might point out besides the idea of changing your mindset to sort of combat the whole ageism?
Well, as I said, it's your own view and your own behaviors.
Hmm.
It is, maintaining your skill set. I mean, one of the things that we have seen in this pandemic is the fact that many of our younger colleagues have upskilled during the pandemic. My question to everyone who's on here is, have you been upskilling? Because we are seeing so much disruption, and you know and by the way, it ain't over, and it's going to, as we go into recession, whether that's this year, next year, the year after, a recession will eventually get to us. um, are you prepared to have upskilled and to have stayed relevant? um, and that's, the two problems I hear right now from job clubs is people aren't out networking
Hmm.
because everyone's been so isolated for 2+ years, and two, they haven't been upskilling,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And you can assume that certain industries, well, I'll use the class example because everyone sees it, is with the airlines, right? The airlines, they laid off, they got so many pilots to retire, and they retired so many planes. Now, when they bring back, it takes an enormous amount of time to bring a new pilot on board.
Yes. Yes.
And by the way, um, the hospitality industry lost a whole bunch of people And by the way, they all went to work for Walmart and Amazon when they laid everybody off. So as things come back, so how do you fit into that?
Yeah. It,
It-
that's so
it-
true. I was just watching a news story this morning. They were saying that when they even the pilots who were on leave, they weren't keeping them certified. They weren't keeping them going, and so that's part of the reason we're having all this crisis now with flights being canceled, et cetera.
Yep. No, it's, we're seeing this across so many industries. And so one of the things, if you go back, I just did a rebroadcast of my podcast where I had Glenn Swike, who's an executive recruiter for Eon. He's an executive recruiter out of Atlanta. And he talked about the fact is learning to sell yourself on your ability to deal with disruption.
Yeah.
Right. I look back at my career and that's all I've done. I've dealt with disruptive technologies. I've dealt with companies that are collapsing, IBM and Lucent. I've dealt in industries that were incredibly disrupting. I worked for the predecessor to Zoom back in life size technology. Video wasn't as disruptive because we weren't ready for it. But now, I mean, look what we're doing.
Yeah, I know.
We're doing it. We're doing a TV show on LinkedIn, right?
Yep.
And we're, it's putting out on YouTube and everywhere else. And I'm doing this with a $60 microphone and just my 2015 MacBook Air.
Uh-huh. Oh, I know. I remember, a couple of decades ago when my husband was traveling. He was in Europe often, traveling for business, and we would have this. He'd be gone for a couple of weeks, so we'd have this very grainy video, and you're trying to have a conversation, and things have just changed so much that now the world in some ways is so small. As you say, you're in Mexico. I'm in the Metro New York City area. And
Right.
here we are talking like we're sitting in the same room together. And it is a whole mindset change. I think that people say, "Oh, let me jump on and do that. Let me try that." Do you see that as a challenge for people that they are set in their ways? I know I have worked for more than one boss who was younger than me, like a decade younger than me, but in knowledge and ability they were a decade older than me. Do you find that people have that problem adjusting to that?
Well, I think number one, part of it is learning to get started and to try new things.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I found in my career, and I've only been laid off once, and I volunteered for that layoff. And every job I've ever left, I left on my terms and not on their terms. And I've never let anything stop me. And it's like right now I have an online community and we're running several different community calls based on how to start a podcast. And people go, "Oh my gosh, it's so difficult." And it's like, no, it's not. You have this belief that it must be hard. Now, by the way, the first episodes you'll produce will suck.
Yeah.
And that's okay. You can delete them. But nonetheless, I've really worked on my workflow. So I can, after I finish an interview, I can have it edited and up ready to go in about 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing it with free software, Audacity. I use something called Auphonics to do all the audio leveling and noise reduction. And by the way, I get 2 hours free a month. This is low cost. I mean, and you have to realize that if you do this long enough, people come to me now. I like to joke the fact in 2018, after I'd been doing the podcast for a little less than 2 years, and we spent 5 months here in Ajijic as we were We were experimenting to see if this would work. And I came back to Austin and we had neighbors just picking up our mail. I had 5 major publishers to send me books because they want to be on my podcast. And I kind of went,
Yeah. Yeah.
what?
It's true. The entry to do things like this is so inexpensive.
Yes.
My platform that I use here is $25 a month. I have inexpensive equipment that I'm using. And and my podcast is hosted very inexpensively. I mean, there is that barrier, and people think, oh my goodness, and they don't even want to try. And I will say one thing that I think when I see people, and perhaps this is another one of an assumption on my part, when I see people who have changed careers and done a lot of different things, I feel that they may just adapt better to change.
Well, there's no question. It's your willingness to get started. So I had Diane Wingard who came up with this comment. She's a psychologist and a coach. She says, if you wait until you're ready to get started, you'll never start.
Yeah.
So do it and see whether it works. And you have to stick with it. And that's one of the key things. Just get started.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I've found that things come to me now, and there's no question. And we can talk about fixed versus growth mindsets. Am I willing to put myself out there, thinking that I may get ridiculed for it? Which, by the way, most of the time you won't. People all will very often be impressed that you tried. If I look at I've had 3 quote career failures. And the 3 things I took away from those was, number 1, always have a plan B. What are you going to do if this isn't going to work? In other words, when I went off to teach high school math. Even though I was really good at it, I couldn't do it. It was exhausting. So unfortunately, I didn't have a plan B. Every time after that, I always had. 2, if you're going to fail fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And so I grew up in the generation. Failure is not an option. You fail, you're a screw up. Well, I've worked in tech. I'm sorry, it's fail often, fail fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And three, always learn something from it. If you haven't learned something from it, then it was probably a really unworthwhile thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I try to keep in mind, my friend Brenda Miller, she says things, instead of failure, it's always a learning experience. If it's, whenever something doesn't go the way you plan, it's a learning experience. And, I try to adopt that attitude myself. I personally have been very hard on myself when I first worked at the magazine. And I did something, I forget what it was, like I had too much research, whatever, that was not a good thing. And my boss at the time was very kind to me about it. And I said something about, I appreciate you not really sort of railing on me. And she said, you're so hard on yourself that why should I be? Why should I be hard on you? Because you're so hard on yourself anyway. And so, I think it's important to, to think of those things.
Well, it's interesting. I have a bunch of people on my podcast, very often from my online community, who've made successful pivots, and they've never been interviewed before. So,
okay.
Right. This is not something they've ever done. And so my goal is to make them comfortable and just say, we're going to have a conversation. And I had Debbie Schnurr on the podcast. She is a former mechanical engineer who is now a master gardener out of California.
Oh, wow.
And when she listened to my first cut of it, she was going, "Oh, can you take this? I got too many nervous laughs." And I said, "I'm going to take some of it out, But if I take too much out, it's not you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I learned a long time ago as a public speaker, the person who is the person who your harshest critic will always be you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just understand that. And you're probably capable of a lot more than you think. I've had a recruiter out of Austin on the podcast, and he talks about, sending out these big email campaigns to recruiters and hiring managers. He says, yeah, I want you to send out emails to 600 people. And people go, oh, I'm going to get rejected a lot. He says, no, you're not. This is Gary O'Neill. What you're going to get is a lot of silence. You're going to let people not respond. But if you send out emails to 600 people and you get a 30% response rate, that's 20% response rate. That's 120 people that you get to talk to. And most people actually want to talk to you. And if you go in there and say, okay, I'm looking for some advice. I'm not looking for a job. I just want some advice.
Mm-hmm.
Most people will talk to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And by the way, it's not about you. It's about you helping them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I love that idea. And since you had mentioned the idea of networking, which, is so essential, I'm sure you, as I've been out at networking events, and there's someone there who's running around with their brand new business cards, passing them around because, oh my goodness, I just lost my job. And let me give a business card to everyone. And you know where that ends up, in the what do they call it? The circular filing cabinet. Because, and so many people that I talk to, friends of mine who are in a job search, they say they hate networking. And I think a lot of that problem is they think of it as being this transactional thing where I am going to get people to help me. But the thing is, if you just shift that mindset a little and say, you know what, I'm going to meet people. I'm not going to have any expectations. Maybe I'll meet somebody that I can help. Maybe I'll meet someone who'll become a friend. And you don't have that, a lot of these things are just about mindset. It really can change your experience.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple examples. Number one is when I would go to a networking event, my goal is to see who I could help.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm able to help you, stuff comes back.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a buddy back in Austin, Steve Harper, wrote the book, The Ripple Effect. And he relates it to every time you do something good for someone, it's like dropping a little drop of water into a pool and it creates a ripple and it goes out. Will it reflect and come back? Maybe. But by the way, if it does come back, it usually comes back when you least expect it.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is throughout your career is to create good karma.
Mm-hmm.
Is create relationships, keep creating those relationships. Because by the way, I said, in all my career changes, I never did it alone. And start looking at, and who can I help? And with no expectation of getting anything in return. I'm going to switch you to this because one of the key things that people don't realize is very often your most valuable network connection are what they refer to as a weak tie.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'll use the example. When I was out looking for a teaching job, my most valuable connector was my chiropractor.
Mm-hmm.
She knew superintendents. And so, I like to say, if you've got children, one of your greatest weak ties is your children's friends' parents.
Mm-hmm.
Because they may have nothing to do. Their career may be totally different than yours, but they know people you don't know.
Yes, absolutely.
And those are the people to say, okay, what do you think I ought to do? I've had on my podcast a number of times my buddy Tom Singer. Tom is a full-time professional speaker, and he spoke about networking at association meetings. His entire business blew up in 3 days in February of 2020. He was on track to have his best quarter ever. And what he did was he says, I'm going to open up my Rolodex. I'm going to show how old I am. By the way, I'm 66. And he says, I'm going to talk to one smart person every day. And he says, okay, here's my situation. What do you think I ought to do? So he talked to 100 people over about 6 months. And by the way, he got 5 good ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's tried a number of things. He just got hired as the CEO for the Austin Technology Council, which is just an association. He's still doing his speaking. He tried being an executive recruiter. As he waits for the meeting business to come back. And by the way, a lot of speakers have pretty big egos. Tom just basically took all of that, packaged it up, and said, screw it, I need help.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's, in fact, I just exchanged an email with him the other day after he became the CEO. And it's like, I got to try something different. The meeting business is coming back slowly.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I like to say, it's learn to be scrappy. Because we live in strange times.
Oh, I know. I'm longing for some quiet times where I'm not turning on the TV in dread. So we think things have been so, crazy for so many reasons, political climate and pandemic and, the world, just things going on in Europe affecting us here. And
let me give you one little trick.
Okay.
Turn off the damn TV.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah.
I had Liz Green on my podcast early in the pandemic, and she has several books on uncertainty and stress. And she talked about the fact that consume your news from printed material, from the written word. Because the television and the radio, they know how to suck you in emotionally. Don't do that. So, by the way, I don't watch any TV. My wife is right now watching a Netflix, but I used to be a huge sports fan. I've turned all that off.
Wow.
And my life is better for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's learning how to manage you, and how do I stay in the present moment? As I said, I have a whole chapter in my book on MSU disorder, which is make stuff up. It's so easy to go, oh, this is happening, so therefore XYZ is going to happen. And the answer is you don't know that.
Yeah, that's true. It's all of even the talk we hear about recession. It's like, oh, it's imminent, any second now. And then, as you say, it could be next year. Might not happen, might not be as bad as people think. So,
Yeah. I mean, it's learning to spot. I like to say I'll use a class example. I had a client who had an 8-month courtship with this pharmaceutical company. She was looking for a pharmaceutical marketing job, and she couldn't leave before a certain period because she needed to wait for her pension to vest. And at one point, the recruiter kind of went radio silent on her for 2 weeks. And she's going, I've lost the job. Oh my God, I lost the job. And you know what happened? The recruiter's mother got really ill and she just took time off.
Yep.
Okay. Second, she's going, and, she couldn't leave before a certain date. And that was 2 months away. And they offered her the job and says, I can't start until this date. And they said, Why not? She says, because if I leave today, I lose $140,000 in my pension. Because they had asked her, okay, can we make you whole? Can we give you a signing bonus? And then she told her the 140,000. They went, oh, okay, we'll wait.
Yeah, yeah. It's so important, and I tell that to people also, even if it's not something like that. That when you are looking for a job, and particularly if you find a job that is the one that you want, and you're excited about it, but the people, the hiring manager is not on the same timetable as you are. I mean, hiring, when they have to hire someone, that's just another thing on their plate. They already have their job, and this is now something else. And so, if you don't hear from someone, it doesn't necessarily mean that, they're done with you, or, you're not getting it, because it's important to remember that, we're all on different timetables, and what it might be very important to me is not necessarily important to them, or to another person.
Yeah. One of the things I learned back in the 1990s, I worked for IBM, and I was traveling usually once to twice a month. And for 2.5 years, I didn't have a single successful business trip. I had some always go wrong. And one of the things I realized is I'm not in control.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and good example is weather. Sorry, that's above my pay grade.
Really?
And so, I use the example back in the early 90s. I was working mid 90s. I was working in an executive briefing center, and Linux was hot. And I was going from Austin to Atlanta one evening for to talk to a Linux users group, a bunch of geeks. And the IBM sales rep said, could you come earlier in the day and speak to a bunch of Coca-Cola executives? I said, sure, why not? So I got the first flight out of Austin, went to Dallas. By the way, for many years, if you flew out of Austin, everything went to Dallas. When you died, you went to Dallas. And I got to Dallas, and there was horrible weather in Atlanta, and I got all worried. I was going, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to miss the Coca-Cola meeting at 1:00. It's 8:30 in the morning. It's like, so I called the rep up, and I said, it doesn't look like I'm going to make it. And his response was, okay. I created myself all kinds of stress on stuff I made up. Now, the important piece is when you catch yourself doing it, and everybody does it. If anyone says they don't do it, they're lying. Is notice that. Okay. And, and understand what was the stress that you created for yourself. Because then you might be able to create procedures. I call them stop, drop, and roll procedures to catch those. And realizing that, okay, I can manage certain interactions. I can manage my own behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And this becomes very critical when we are living in this incredible time of uncertainty. I mean, right now, a lot of people are real excited the pandemic is over. It's not.
Oh, I know. Not yet.
Not yet.
Probably never really completely.
Well, the fact is, a lot of companies will not hire permanent until there's a certain certainty. And right now we're watching things, everyone's, there's going to be a recession. Well, we don't know. It might be next week. What effect will the Fed have on raising interest rates? I don't know. I mean, the only thing for sure that we see is the tech industry probably is overhired. VC money is drying up. That means a lot of startups will start cutting back and start trying to stretch their existing money. There are companies like Uber that, by the way, they're in trouble. They're having to raise rates because they actually need to make money. And they're having a tougher time getting drivers because they're paying them less and less.
Yeah.
And there was a very good Vox podcast talking about the fact that they called it a millennial subsidy. Over the last 10 years, there have been a lot of services that have been subsidized by VC money. And suddenly that tap is being turned off. Like, for example, all the delivery services, get Grubhub, Uber Eats,
right.
None of them are profitable. None of them are even close to profitable. And so what's going to happen to those? I don't know. But the same time, there are now what we call ghost kitchens popping up. These are restaurants that have no seating. They're delivery and pickup only.
Yeah. We have a couple of places around here like that.
And you're going, what? And yeah. And will that continue? I don't know.
I know. It's so many of those things that you were talking about when the pandemic was at its height. And everybody was ordering through, Instacart and places like that. Well, once I started going back to the grocery, well, I don't need them anymore. And I'm sure that there's so many, and a lot of these, even like DoorDash and things like that, people aren't as eager now. People want to get out. Let's go and pick up the food, not, have somebody bring it.
So it's similar, there are now dark grocery stores. Whole Foods and Walmart are Amazon and Walmart are building grocery stores that people never go into. They're pickup and delivery only.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And by the way, the number one user of online grocery shopping are people over 55. They make up 70% of all online grocery shopping.
Wow.
I wish I joke. I've been trying to order a crystal ball on Amazon for 2 years. It's always on back order. I want to predict the future.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, right. Oh, wow. So, I know.
Yeah, that's one of the problems is just simply pay attention to what's going on in your industry, in your career space, what changes are happening. Because I don't care what industry you're in, stuff is happening.
Yeah. So,
right?
Yeah. So Kevin, who, you and I both know, says Dallas is Dallas. So I don't know, maybe that's a Texas thing. I'm not, but I figured I would pull that up for you to see his comment there. But so we are winding down. We're kind of running a little bit over. I appreciate you. I'm trying to be appreciative of your time because I could sit here and talk to you for hours. But is there anything that you would like to share that I didn't ask you, that didn't come up in our conversation, that you think is important?
Okay, number one is, in fact, I've just released this last weekend my latest white paper on ageism. It's called "Ageism: The Last Acceptable Bias." And the fact is, I tried to gather all of the learning I've had from all the different people. And once you start understanding why ageist behaviors occur, then you can adapt. And so a lot of ageism is to say, we need to keep these people in place. A lot of that has to do with discriminating against people of color.
Yeah.
A lot of discrimination for ageism is learning how to, it's called opportunity blocking. At 60, we're supposed to get the hell out of the way. We are blocking the younger people, which, by the way, is bull hockey, but there's a belief there. Once you understand that, so it's like, one of the things I got my last job, my last corporate gig, which was at Life Size Communications, which was high definition video conferencing. And I walked into the room and the hiring manager, I wasn't interviewing, I was just meeting the hiring manager. I basically told him right up front, I don't want your job. I was 20 years his senior. I just want to go back and do something fun.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I basically walked in and acknowledged the elephant in the room. And I handed him a CD. This is what I did at my last tech startup. Do you want to do something similar? And I got hired a week later. So one of the things that you have to understand is, I'm follically challenged. I don't try and hide that. You are who you are, and acknowledge it. And by the way, be proud of it. And it's how, for someone over 50, and if you're hiring for a younger manager, or you're going to be working for a younger manager, acknowledge it. Make sure saying, I can help you, but I don't want your job. I'm done with that.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you want to do this? And yes, it's taking a risk. We need to take risks.
Yes, yes, that is so true. And I think that's a good note to end on. I thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to have to go back and rewatch this. I've made a few notes as I was listening to the things that you're sharing. I do so appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who's been here with us. I know we have a few people who've been watching us this entire time. For everyone who's not in Mexico or elsewhere, enjoy the upcoming 4th of July weekend and have a great rest of your day.